first classical piece we're going to look at this week is Hector Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique. Written in 1830, this remains one of the earliest and most important works of what we now see as the Romantic period of classical music, and it also remains one of the most widely performed pieces to this day. From its inception, this piece was significant because it called for nearly 100 musicians, making it require by far the most of any piece to that point. Along with this, the composition is very narrative in nature, as it follows the story of an artist with a wild imagination who apparently poisons himself with opium to try and get over a broken heart. In the beginning of the piece, Berlioz creates these massive arcs of sound that all keep going back to the main key. And while at the time it was rather unconventional to do this, in modern times it's what gives the piece its distinctive sound and movement. As the symphony continues, there's a very obvious sense of the dramatic and excitement, and this really helps to retain that narrative feel that runs throughout. It's in the second movement that you see a lot of the non-traditional instrumentation being used in this piece, and that's why it has such a unique tone and pace in that specific part. Then the work begins to sway very softly, and you can tell that in this case the protagonist is starting to deal with his wild emotions. And the way that the flutes and the oboes work at this point is one of the finest parts of the entire piece. The music gets darker and somewhat erratic in the final portions, and you can tell that this is when the main character becomes really erratic and starts to come unhinged. And the way that the main theme is brought back in this part is nothing short of brilliant. When you look at the fact that this musical piece is able to give you so much imagery, such a clear storyline, you can understand why it's so enjoyable and so significant, but at the same time you can understand why a lot of historians cite this piece as the beginning of psychedelic sound. For so many reasons, this is just a piece you have to know, so go track it down. The next classical work you absolutely have to hear is Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 by Liszt. To be honest, this is one of the most famous piano pieces ever composed, and it really remains the benchmark by which great pianists are still measured. While there are full orchestra versions of this that you can find, the fact remains, due to the technical demands of the piece and the amazing finale, if you want to be a great piano player, this is what you have to be able to play. Along with this, due to the pace and tone, it's really become a huge part of popular culture, especially in the world of cartoons. And you can even find it in slightly altered forms in many parts of popular music. Based around Hungarian folk music, this one was finished in about 1847, and it was a runaway success, with Liszt eventually creating a piano duet based on it in about 1874. You can really hear the strong Hungarian and gypsy influence that runs throughout the entire piece, as the actual musical scale as well as the way that the pace and the rhythm work on this one really reflect that presence in the best way possible. It's the bounce and that skip that are present all across that make this work instantly identifiable, but it's so unique and so representative of Liszt's heritage that you really get to see the entire range of what is classical music. It's the way that he works with so many different keys that ultimately make the song so powerful, and it's also this aspect that's made it so popular in cartoons as well as live performances. Another interesting note on this is that in the original manuscript, Liszt actually left a note asking the piano player to go ahead and improvise at one point. Perhaps because it's such a daunting piece in the first place, most piano players to this day completely ignore that and play one of 2 or 3 different standard approaches here. But there are a few famous performers who have absolutely made their career in that exact moment. The last piece I'm going to recommend you guys listen to is Mendelssohn's Symphony No. 4, aka Italian. Written in March of 1833, this was actually done from a formal request by the London Royal Symphony, and Mendelssohn himself conducted the original performance of this in May of that same year. The performance was a massive success on every front, and most historians point to this as the beginning of the new wave of British classical music. But strangely enough, Mendelssohn himself was not a huge fan of what he'd done, and he would tweak it in various ways for about the next 20 years. This piece is largely defined by the high energy, absolutely joyous opening, and he was working in the key of D minor to try and reflect when he saw this religious ceremony back in his home of Naples. However, it's the final movement of this piece that proves the most fascinating on many levels. That's where he brings in almost Neapolitan and Roman influences at the same time, as well as accentuating the minor key that you realize was running throughout the entire piece. The tonal composition of this was also absolutely groundbreaking, as it was the first piece ever to begin in a major key and then end in the corresponding tonal minor. And to tell you the truth, this is a trend that remains largely present to this day. Overall, this piece is said to be inspired by the color and the atmosphere of his native Italy, which is why it's taken on the secondary name of Italian. And it's not only a piece you should know, but it's one of those works that once you hear it, you'll realize you probably already did. So those are some more classical works I really recommend you guys go check out. Classical music is really the basis for almost everything present today, and it's a genre you must be familiar with. And be sure to check back here every day for all the music news, reviews, and knowledge you'll ever need.